Welcome and thanks for joining us. You are here today because you believe that information and knowledge sharing is critical in a connected world. Our goal with this show and company is to introduce high quality, actionable insights that will help both hiring managers and job seekers execute lean recruitment processes and gain industry knowledge to further enhance their careers. Today, I'm joined by an engineer turned founder of a newly launched marketplace for services designed to help consumers outsource any kind of tasks to trusted ID verified taskers in a simple and secure way. He was part of the Adapt innovation team of Bain & Company, where he supported companies and corporations to innovate, adapt, and reinvent their products, strategies, and methodologies. He is a highly skilled engineer, manager, and instructor, having worked on rebuild and development projects throughout Berlin. Having had the pleasure of knowing him for the past 4 years, it is a great pleasure to introduce Lorenzo, founder of Grazia. So welcome to the show, Lorenzo. How are you doing?
I'm very, very good. Thank you so much for having me here. Really, really excited to be talking about Lean Startup with you.
Perfect. And yeah, I mean, you jumped straight into it. So the focus of the talk today is around the idea of the lean startup methodology. So I've come with a trusted book from Eric Ries, which has obviously been popular for a while now, but I think I picked it up roughly about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, had no idea what it was, started to read it, then started to work with more companies who thought that way. And then now we fast forward, I kind of wanted to just share it with people from somebody who's actually implemented it. So just to quickly explain what it is, it's a methodology for developing businesses and products, aims to shorten the product development cycle and rapidly discover if a proposed business model is obviously viable. So it's achieved through adapting combination of business hypothesis driven experimentation, iteration of product releases, and obviously validated learning. So before we jump into anything specific about how it's implemented or anything like that, just to explain why obviously you're on the call, you have obviously just launched your own business, Grazia, and you've basically been using the lean startup methodology pretty much since day one, if I'm right. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. To be fair, like I started using Lean Startup or as you did, I discovered Lean Startup was when I was an engineer,
Mm-hmm.
and found myself so many times being in the situation to build things that I was asking myself, like, why am I really doing it? Is it worth it? Is it the right thing? Uh, how should we really build it, and why, and so on and so forth. And since then, I never really abandoned it, and
Yeah.
I carry it with me throughout my whole career. And I would say that, yeah, definitely the most important time for me was when I used the Lean Startup was definitely in the process of creating Grazia and throughout the whole
Yeah.
development of Grazia as a product and as a business.
So you've used it obviously in your current business that we're just founding. So we'll talk about that in a second. You've used it in your former company, obviously Bain and Company, and obviously we'll touch upon how you've actually helped implement it into larger corporations. And if we have time on this video, as far as I'm aware, you've also used it in your previous company before Bain and Company as well. But obviously we'll see if we've got time for that. But before we dive into how it's used in a corporation, how it's used potentially in a new startup, can you explain what is the actual key teachings of what the lean methodology is trying to help us achieve?
Yeah. So in the definition that you were saying before of the Lean Startup, there's actually a lot of meat in there. There's a lot to unpack. Um, and I would like to focus on three aspects, which, yeah, are to me the three key learnings are really, really important, and that everyone that would like to try Lean Startup should follow.
Mm-hmm.
Before jumping to that, I want to say just one thing. You were saying that Lean Startup is a methodology, which is absolutely correct. What I would like to add is that Lean Startup is an agile methodology, which I think is very, very important,
Mm-hmm.
because that means that for all the people, all the companies that are really using agile, it means that they can, you know, use it as a methodology, but also use it as a tool. So they can use it as a tool to help them, you know, build their business, to help them, you know, include lean startup in their processes without having to change radically. They might, even if they decide to not adopt lean startup entirely, they might be able to just take bits and bytes here and there and just add them to their agile development process. But yeah, back to the key learnings and the key teachings. So the first one is absolutely about validated learning, which basically means that you as a founder, you as a product person, part of a product team, anything, you can have a lot of assumptions and you can have a lot of hypotheses, and your hypothesis can be more or less accurate. They can be right or wrong, of course. They can be based on more or less in-depth research, but they are hypotheses, and you should accept that. You should embrace that, and you should aim, or you should find ways to transform these hypotheses into facts. Mm-hmm. And that is where lean validated learning comes into play, right? You want to constantly be learning. You constantly want to test your hypothesis and learn from these tests, and which means finding ways to actually test this hypothesis, and maybe most importantly, finding ways to measure these tests, right? So am I actually learning something? Yes or no? I think this is very, very, very critical. And you have to do it by adopting or seeking real metric proof in constant to vanity metrics, which I think is something that everyone is very, very simple to fall into that pitfall, and choosing metrics and KPIs that do not really prove or disprove your assumption, but they make you or your idea or your product or your feature look good. It's when you do lean startup, but I think in general, if you build something, you want to build the right thing. Mm-hmm. And you cannot expect to be building always the right thing and to be always building the right thing at the first try, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to be wrong. Embrace that. Try to find ways to prove yourself right or wrong as soon as possible, as fast as possible. So adopt real metric proof and not vanity metrics.
When you're talking about vanity metrics, for those that haven't necessarily heard of the lean startup before, or had the pleasure of reading the book or watching any of Eric's talks or anything like that, so real metric proof and vanity metrics, he explains it in the book, is obviously two very different things. And you're right, a lot of people will fall into the vanity side. I know what it means, you know what it means, but for somebody who's never understood this, can you give an example of what a vanity metric might be and what a real metric proof would be?
Totally. I think we're actually probably going to get in more details later, but when we talk about Grazia and my experience with it, but for instance, user signups is something that very often can be a vanity metric, mm-hmm. because it's something that you can tweak very easily, right? So you can, for instance, increase your marketing budget or your efforts, acquire more users, and therefore you have more signups. And when you want to, test the viability of your product, mm-hmm. a lot of times signups is not really what you actually want to measure, because having a lot of users by itself doesn't really mean anything, right? Okay, you can have 1 million users, but nobody, let's make an example of an e-commerce, is actually buying anything. Do you have a viable business? I wouldn't say so.
Yeah. So in that example, then the vanity metric would be how many users we get per month, but the real metric is maybe how many people are actually buying the product that we have on this e-commerce platform. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So you've obviously discussed the validated learning aspect. What are the other two main teaching points that you would say are from this?
The second point is that you need to constantly be aiming for product market fit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what product market fit? It means that in simple words that you need to have the feeling that the market, which ultimately is your users or your potential users, are pulling the product out of you, right? So you're not trying to enforce the product, you're not trying to enforce a specific behavior or specific features or specific needs. And you're not trying to do that because you're just like miserably going to fail. You just cannot do that. But in contrast, in opposition to that, you need to actually follow the market, right? And so you constantly generate hypotheses that you can do in, there are several ways, several methodologies. Design thinking might be one, but there are really so many. And you test these hypotheses with your users. The users decide if they like it or they don't like it, if they want it or they don't want it. And based on that, you decide what's the next step, and so on and so forth. If you do this throughout your development process, you end up having a business or a product that is basically shaped by your users. And that's what I mean by having the market pulling the product out of you.
Okay. And then the last one from your perspective, what would that be?
The last one is about MVP, and more specifically about MVP as a mindset. I think talking about MVP is like opening a Pandora box, right? Like you could talk for days and weeks, and you will find a lot of people that agree with you, a lot of people that disagree. But ultimately, MVP means like minimum viable product. And I think it's very important to maybe spend like just a couple of seconds talking about what these words really mean. So first of all, the MVP is a product, right? So it needs to be something that you can put in front of users, that you can have users use. If users cannot use something, if they cannot interact with it, if you cannot experience it, then you're not doing an MVP. Then viable, right? So you want to test the viability of one or multiple hypotheses, even though I would say that trying to limit the number of hypotheses you test in each iteration of your MVPs is usually a good thing. Otherwise, you risk to create interdependencies, between hypotheses, and then screw up your learnings ultimately. And the last word is minimum, and I kept it as last because I think this is the word that causes the most confusion, and I think that's the word that pushes a lot of people away from MVP, because a lot of people misunderstand what minimum means. So minimum doesn't mean crappy. Minimum doesn't mean ugly. Minimum doesn't mean broken. Minimum means that you want to build only what is required in order to make the other two parts of the acronym MVP, so viable and product, possible. So you ultimately want to build just what is required to test the viability of your product. In other words, I want to make an example. Like a lot of people say, oh, but MVPs are ugly, crappy, that they are very bad to use. I don't think there is anywhere something like that being said or written or specified. If a great user experience or a great design is part of your of what you want to test and is part of your product, of your core, well, then you do definitely want to include that in your MVP, right?
Hmm.
If you think about challenger banks, a lot of what challenger banks offer to users, what they bring to the table, is a great user experience. So you cannot MVP a challenger bank if you provide a product, an MVP, that does not have a great experience. So definitely invest on that. You still have a chance to be true to the word minimum, for example, by reducing the number of features or
Hmm.
reducing your audience, right? So the possible, the number of users you're targeting with your MVP. You might decide to focus on a very, very specific niche that has specific needs, and therefore you keep, the number of features and therefore the resources, the investment you need to put into building the MVP to the minimum.
I think in the book, Eric explains that the MVP is designed to get the early adopters in. So the people who don't necessarily matter, there's a few bugs, glitches, things like that, but they just quite enjoy the idea, and then you start building. And actually, to give an example as well, so obviously at the beginning of kind of COVID, one of my friends, which you're actually part of the community as well, a guy called Alex, obviously started a mentoring kind of Slack channel. So we basically used Slack's product itself to test the hypothesis: would people be interested in mentoring other people? Pure and simple. Would you be happy to connect with a stranger, support them career or personal development? And I think in the space of a month and a half, we have just under 200 people on that Slack channel. So the hypothesis is confirmed. It's now, okay, how do we move that to the next stage in the MVP? It's okay, we've got the website, we've got the Slack channel. What do we keep iterating to get it a little bit better, a little bit further along? Do we build something different? So I think the whole thing about making it absolute minimal, you're correct in using it as the last bit, is that he used something that was free to use to test the hypothesis. Was the community there? Not let's go build something perfect and then find actually there's no market fit.
Totally, absolutely. And I think it's particularly challenging when it comes to product, and I would say possibly even more difficult for technical people, engineers, developers, because they usually struggle to accept that whatever they are building or releasing might lack some functionalities, and it's something that they care so much about, that putting out there something that they know is not complete. Even though we could argue forever about what complete really means, because I guess nothing is ever complete when we talk about businesses or products, and particular technical products. But yeah, that's what they struggle with so much, right? That the minimum means like giving up on something, at least in the short term, and they most of the time they take it as a failure, right? And that's why before I was saying that the third key learning is MVP, but in particular MVP as a mindset, because MVP is not one stage, one milestone in a product roadmap, or in the development phase of a product, or in the history of a company. If you embrace the fact that MVP can be a mindset, it means that you can be MVPing everything, and you can keep MVP, which means you never release one MVP and after that you release like the final or whatever you want to call it. Every time you just move from one iteration of an MVP to another iteration. And if you embrace this mindset, then I think it becomes much more simple to accept the fact that you are releasing something that from your point of view is not finished yet. Because it becomes a yet. You will do another iteration if your hypothesis is proven correct, where you will be, going one step further into development of that feature, of that functionality, or in the development of your business. And that's okay, right? You just add another piece and you test that piece and then you move forward and so on and so forth. But if you are unfortunately proven wrong, and that happens, well, then you are just saving so much time, so much frustration. I would say it's actually also even saving you from being unable to accept a failure. Because if you build something, a company, a product for 2 years, and then you have your big bang and you release everything, and the market doesn't respond as you expected, how hard is it to accept that verdict from the market? It's really, really difficult, right?
Yeah.
But if you instead invested 3 months and the market says like, not really, well, at that point, it's fairly simple to pivot, to try to adjust, to experiment something different.
I think what I'm curious now is to understand a bit more how you've actually done this with your current company. So, as we mentioned in the introduction, you've just launched Grazia. You obviously, I've known you in a couple of different companies now, so it's a big, obviously, achievement to launch your own business. So talk us through, I guess, a little bit more about what you guys do, and then how we're using Lean right now to, try and find what your market fit effectively is. And I guess on top of that, have we gone through the motions of doing an MVP and iterations and that feedback loop? How has that gone so far, been a couple of months as a business?
Yeah. So Grazia, as you were saying before, is a marketplace for services. As of right now, is a C2C marketplace. So we try to match customers and customers. So we are not targeting professionals or businesses. And the idea is, well, you just can outsource any kind of task. And on the other hand, you have, people that are, maybe trying to earn some extra money, that are after Corona unemployed and they struggle to find another job, students, and so on and so forth, that might be able to actually provide this kind of services that the other side of the marketplace is looking for. And what we try to do is to match them. The idea came, I think it's something that me and my co-founder had in our heads for a long time. It was never like concrete, but this moment where you tell yourself like, oh, I would pay someone to do this for me, right? Like I would love to pay someone to do this for me. And we found ourselves several times in this situation. And then last winter, I was lucky enough to spend like a few months in Brazil. And there they have this iFood and well, I forgot the name of the other company, but anyway, they are Rappi. They are kind of Lieferando Deliveroo, but they actually provide a lot of additional services that Deliveroo and Lieferando or Foodora do not provide. And I guess noticing that, plus this thing that we had in the back of our heads for a long time, brought us to the point that we thought, okay, maybe there is a space, there is a market to do something along those lines here in Europe, here in Germany as well. And so we decided to try. Now, I think I would like to say that our startup is the most complicated one, and our idea is the riskiest one. But I guess the truth is that every startup is very complicated. Every new business idea is very complicated, right? And we were very aware of that. And we were aware of the fact that when you build a marketplace, you do need to deal with two different sides, right? You have like, it's a little bit like having two products, right? Because you're targeting different users and therefore you need to make sure that you are appealing to both this sides of your marketplace. Otherwise, you don't have a marketplace. So a lot of risks, a lot of uncertainty. What we decided to do, which is, to be honest, very similar to what you mentioned before with this Slack group, we decided to build a landing page, which is like Lean Startup textbook, basically. A landing page is basically a website, is a one page or just a couple of pages website that can be built using some website generator tools like, I don't know, Jimdo or whatever, or you can build like you can use landing pages builders like Unbounce or Lead Pages that are very similar, but they offer some like analytics tools on top of the traditional web builder tools that allow you to a little bit measure the response of your landing page. And so, yeah, we used one of these tools. We built our landing page. We built actually several landing pages. And what was the content of these landing pages? Where we tried to sell our USP, right? We tried to describe what our product was and why our potential users, in our opinion, had to try our product, right? Why they should not live without it. So yeah, try to describe your USP. You build, or most of the time, you want to build multiple landing pages because you want to test different variations of your USP. Or for instance, you might want to test different features, right? So if you wonder like, what could be my killer feature? Well, try multiple ones, try multiple landing pages. In each landing page, put a different feature. You might be wondering, what is the correct pricing for my product? Once again, try different landing pages with different pricing models, and see how your users respond. When I say see how your users respond, I mean, and if we think back to what an MVP is, and if we think about the validated learning, and if we think about real metric proof, well, you do want to get some metric out of your landing page. And I would say the commonly agreed upon metric is conversion rate. So you don't want to look at sessions or visits or this kind of metrics, because it might easily fall into the vanity metric kind of KPI, because you can spend more money, drive more traffic to your landing page, and increase the number of visits, right? What you want to know, though, is, are the users that come to the page interested in this product, and would they be willing to try it if this product would exist? Because of course you're just building the landing page, you're actually not building the product. So what we did, we add a tiny form that was asking, if I remember correctly, name, email, and name, last name, and email, to add a little bit of friction, right? So if people are willing to leave this personal information behind, it means that they really kind of care and they didn't just click by accident on this button.
Little hoop that you get them to jump through, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly, right. I would say it's literally adding a little bit of friction, because friction is a proof of interest. If you just would magically make something appear on the screen of your users, that would mean anything, right? So add friction, and that is a proof of interest. And so we did this multiple landing pages. We tried different variations of our model, of our functionalities, of our features. and of our pricings as well. And out of this, we picked the one that had the best conversion rate, which conversion rate and conversion rate is the the number of people that actually leave the personal details and subscribe compared to the number of total visitors.
Sure.
And by the way, I would say it's as a rule of thumb, aim to have at least a 20% conversion rate. I say as a rule of thumb because it highly depends on your business, on what you're trying to sell, who is your target group. It depends on a lot of things, but I think 20% is a good average. And on the internet, there are like ton of resources.
So before you carry on for a second, just want to backtrack slightly to make sure we understand it correctly. You're saying create several landing pages before we start creating the product. So the MVP in this instance is the landing page. The hypothesis is, are people going to be interested in this sort of product? Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
So we're creating these landing pages. Are we creating different so web links? So they might see Grazia, they might see company number 2, they might see company number 3, or is it that a different person will see a randomly generated one of 3 landing pages and then you start comparing that way? Because again, going into the MVP stages, so I'm sitting there setting up my business, feel really good about it. But now before I start actually doing anything, I've got to go create 3 or 4 different pages before I even start doing any work on the actual business. So how are we getting those landing pages in front of people?
Right. So if we bring back the definition of lean startup, we see that the lean startup aims to shorten product development cycles and to rapidly discover if a proposed business model is viable. So in order to discover if a business model is viable, you, if possible, you don't want to build the whole product, the whole company. You actually don't want to build anything if possible. So yeah, the landing page comes before you start doing anything. In our specific example, the landing page came before we even incorporated a company, before I guess we even chose a name for the company, right? It came before anything because we just didn't want to invest any time, mental resources, anything into it before we had some kind of validation. Then to your other point about multiple landing pages. So well, actually taking it from another angle, how do you get people to or users to your landing page? So you should not expect people to come through, I don't know, SEO, so like organic traffic, because that's just not going to happen in such a short amount of time. So usually you have to use paid traffic, which means advertisement. And we chose Facebook ads because they're very, very simple to set up. Actually, anyone can do that. There is like a very, very simple, well, relatively simple interface, web interface that allow you to set up different campaigns, different ads. You can try different audiences, and you can be very, very precise in defining your audiences, which I think is really, really important, because one of the biggest uncertainties, question marks you have when you start a new business is, who are my users? Who are my potential users? Or who is my ideal users? And you most certainly are going to have some hypotheses, some ideas. But one of the best ways to validate that is, well, create multiple ads with or maybe use the same ads, but target different audiences and bring all these audiences to your landing pages, or to your landing page specifically, and then see from which audience you are getting the best conversion rate. And then you can see, well, this audience is probably the audience I want to focus on for this specific product. But you might also see for this other variation of my product, this other audience is performing much better, right? So you might learn a lot of different things, and how to really interpret those different things is ultimately up to you, right? There's also a choice that every entrepreneur has to make at some point. Like, I pursue this model or this other model. What you want, though, ultimately, is to have a validation that there is a viability in there.
Okay. So we've got the MVPs of the web pages. We've started to use paid traffic or paid advertisements to gain at least some level of traffic to start working on a hypothesis. When do we say enough people have clicked on the one that we can now see, okay, that is the right hypothesis, let's start heading in that direction? When is enough effectively?
That is a very good question. There are actually statistical models that tell you, how many people, how many users you need in order to have like a statistically relevant conversion rate. And honestly, there are just like even tools that allow you to, on the internet, that allow you to enter, those are the users I have on the page. This is the conversion rate I got. How relevant, statistically relevant this number is, and you're gonna see, which is something very similar to when you do A/B testing, for instance. And I actually think that if you use tools like lead pages or Unbounce, I believe that they actually show this kind of information directly to you without having to do any additional like calculation.
Okay, so your business as it is now, and hopefully you feel comfortable enough to say, the idea that was in your mind end of last year, was the hypothesis proved correct or incorrect, or have you had to pivot the business slightly since doing these kind of experimentational tests?
So using landing pages gave us the confidence that there is a market for our for us to try to tap into. What we did after that was that we created some bots on. We use SMS bots. We use IVRs, this like automated respondents that you can use over the phone, and a messenger bot that were actually built basically using the same bot, just available on different platforms. And we use that to simulate the interaction that the users would have had with what we thought our app or platform would be, right? And that gave us another layer of validation when we saw that the conversion on people starting this bot, so willing to try out the product, was still very good. That for us was a great signal. But we also saw at the same time that the number of people completing the flow was not satisfying enough. And that led us to realize something that is right now at the core of our business, and it is that services are something extremely personal. First of all, because your needs, when it comes to, I don't know, repainting our apartment, your needs, even though we both want the same service, which is painting, your needs are different from mine because your apartment is different. It's in a different location. You might have, like specific requirements concerning your furnitures, your walls, your ceilings, the paint you want, and so on and so forth. So there is so much flexibility in there that something has to be taken into account. And second, it's very personal when it comes to the fact that you interact with the service provider, which we call tasker.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to painting, repainting your apartment, you let someone into your apartment. And even when you don't have a physical interaction with your tasker, usually you are asking someone else to do something for you. And when the tasker is done, you are left with the result of
Mm-hmm.
the work of the tasker. And you need to be happy with it, right? If you're not happy with that, well, then just it doesn't make any sense. So you need to trust the platform and you need to trust the tasker. And those are learnings that we generated, which might sound very obvious right now, but we generated with the second iteration of our MVP. So this kind of bots, and that ultimately gave us the confidence, and we felt we had enough information and learnings to move to the third iteration, which was building our app, which is what is live right now.
So when did the business, I guess, when did the first landing pages go live? Let's start from there.
I would say we are talking about February, more or less.
Okay.
And we did few iterations on that, and let's say that we had the pages live for a month in total.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, there was a little bit of time that it took me to build this kind of bots. Let's say another, like, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks, even because at that time I still had my job, right? So I was doing it in my free time. And then we had this kind of bots live for, let's say, another month. And then we slowly started building the app. And I would say our pace increased over time while this became more and more like concrete.
Yeah, I think that's the bit I was just trying to work out, because the whole idea of the lean is that consistent iteration, feedback loops, and the idea is it's meant to get a little bit quicker, until hopefully the idea comes that you're doing experiments every single day on one thing or another. But it's quite interesting seeing a brand new startup go from a complete conceptualization idea to, okay, we've gone through, and then you're now on your third iteration from February. So that, I mean, from that process, and I'd imagine you've built this out, and you're probably, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, you're probably looking at ways, okay, how do we start the next processes of learning? How do we then start iterating that a bit further? How, I guess, for anyone who's probably sitting there thinking, okay, it all sounds fantastic, but I'm not in tech, or I don't have, I've not read the book or things like that. Not going completely deep dive into it, but is there any kind of really easy things for people to kind of take away from what you've just said there about, if you're going to start a new business, if you're going to maybe become an entrepreneur within a bigger corporation at the moment, which we'll touch upon in a second, what would be the kind of the really short, sharp, snappy things that you would say, if you do this, you're already starting your journey, probably without realizing it, towards kind of a lean startup idea?
Fair enough. I think the landing pages approach is probably the simplest thing that can be done, right? It's really, really easy to build a landing page using the tools I mentioned before, because they are drag and drop tools, right? So it does not require any technical capability or knowledge. You don't even have to do with, I don't know, like hosting the page or all this kind of technicalities I don't even want to get into. Super, super simple. And it, at the same time, it forces you you need to put something into this landing page, right? You need to put some content, and that means you need to get your ideas right. You need to, agree on, like, okay, this is what I want to build. You basically need to make a little step from, oh, I have this idea that I think is very cool, into like, yeah, I have this idea that is based on this, this, and this. I think it's differentiating because of this and this and this. And I think it would be really, really helpful for this kind of persona and this kind of other persona, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So requires you to think. It allows you to write it down, put it into a page, and then very, very simply, I swear it's really, really simple to get Facebook ads drive traffic into it. You get people to prove or disprove your idea, which I also guarantee is an incredible satisfaction, right? It's a way to have feedback very, very quickly. And it doesn't matter if it's negative or positive. Feedback is just fantastic, right? Because you are taking something out of your brain, putting it out there, and finally having people that are not your friends and family, which are not always the most trustable people to ask to, giving you, letting you know what they think. So
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely advise to start in that way.
Okay. I really appreciate you jumping through kind of your personal experience with your startup right now. It is a personal thing, kind of laying bare a brand new idea and how it's working. And, absolute best of luck. I really do hope that the entire team and business expands. And, in 10 years' time, you'll be in the front cover of loads of magazines and things like that. Who knows? But scale it back to your job before as well, because this isn't your first time doing lean startup. And obviously you work for probably one of the largest organizations, or at least one of the most reputable businesses, Bain and Company. And can you kind of explain, first of all, a little bit about what your job actually was? Because the Adapt team in Berlin is quite different from probably what everyone else thinks about Bain and Company. And, the experience that you guys actually bring to the table, you are all extremely, and you are, and the people working there are extremely highly kind of talented engineers. What was your actual role while working there?
That might be the trickiest question that I received so far. Now, all jokes aside. So, Bain & Company is a management consulting company. It's like one of the top 3 management consulting companies with like a great history, great tradition, and massive clients. Bain, over the years, and sorry, when I say management consulting companies, means that traditionally there is nothing digital, nothing technical, and the kind of expertise that Bain has is very different from the kind of expertise or knowledge or experience that I have. But over the years, Bain realizes that, in order to still be relevant for its clients, it needs to get, a little bit more up to date and embrace digital and help its clients that, as Bain, are the massive corporation, these huge enterprises that very often struggle to keep up with the time, right? That most of the time suffer the competition of much smaller but much faster and much more modern startups.
Mm-hmm.
And Bain realizes, okay, we need to fill this this gap. We need to support our clients in that. And that's when Bain decides to create the team Adapt, that stands for Advanced Digital and Product Team. And there I was part of the development lab, and I was, I had multiple roles. I had times where I was working purely as an engineer, as in like building things for our clients. most of the times still on the validation products, so MVPs. But also other times I was just I was doing something completely different, more as a consultant, right? So advising on how to set up a digital team, how to innovate, how to do what we use very often as a term in Bain, digital transformation, and this kind of things.
Okay, so then how do we get from you being this varied, high-performing engineer, consultant, to somebody who's implementing the lean kind of way of thinking in the probably outdated thinking organizations? How did that start? How did you kind of, because I'd imagine you probably had quite a few roadblocks from people at that time thinking, okay, this couldn't be done, we can't do it like that. So how was that happen? Because that's the main thing, is that there are businesses who maybe aren't even as big as the companies that you used to consult. We're talking about 100, 200 people who are probably still fixated on the way it's always been. This is how we've done it. This is how it's always going to go. No changing. How do we, what kind of takeaways have we seen so far from your experiences in those companies with this idea?
So I guess one of the reasons why I was very, very attracted by Bain is because it's true that I was an engineer, right? And I was part of an engineering team and building things and so on and so forth. But I realized very, very early that I was never particularly interested in the building process. I was never fascinated by engineering challenges. What I was fascinated was the result of the engineering challenges, right? So I was never fascinated. Well, maybe that's too much, but my main goal was never to write code, to crack technical problems. My goal was always to build products that people love to use, and solving the technical problems along the way for me was just like something you have to do to reach the result.
Sure.
So for me, Bain was incredibly appealing because of that, right? Because what Bain told me is like, okay, we are creating this team, and we just want to build amazing solutions for our clients, and we want to help our clients disrupt themselves, and we want you to be part of this. So I just thought it was fantastic. And on top of that, when I spoke for the first time with my manager, he was like talking about lean startup all the time. So I was like, okay, this is just like the right place for me to be. Then you are absolutely right when you say that it was incredibly challenging to be part of Adapt, and I think it still is, because we had to change a mindset, right? We had to bring a new mindset, first of all, into Bain, and after that into our clients. And changing mindset is always very, very complicated. And I would say it requires a lot of patience, and it also requires finding new ways to explain concepts and experiences that for you are so obvious, right? So for me, for example, I've been called in the past like a natural lean startup. I guess it comes very, very simple to me. So I had, together with my team, to find new ways to explain lean startup to people that actually come from the complete opposite mindset, which is, I want to sort out all the possible problems. I want to find an answer to all my questions before I even talk to any user, right? So I don't want to have any interaction with any user based on something that is not defined and written on paper. So very, very different mindsets that meet at some point and inevitably clash. Now, to your question, how do you make corporation, or how do you make anyone embrace or accept or even just consider lean startup? For us, I would say that the key was to really focus a lot on this concept of MVP as a mindset, and really invest a lot of time in explaining what an MVP is, how it might look like, and why it's important. Because a lot of corporations say like, but I don't, I'm this big corporation and I have this massive budget. I'm just going to hire whoever is required in order to build this from A to Z, and then we release it. And I don't need some crappy solution. So first of all, you need to start and explaining, well, but it's not crappy. It's just minimum. You just want to reduce risks. And a lot of enterprises do not realize that the risks they have are actually way higher than the risk the startup has. In one example, if we as Grazia end up building the wrong thing, well, I think we have a runway of like, I don't know, 1.5, 2 years, and then just like, we run out of cash. We wasted 2 years, but it's done. But if you are an enterprise, a massive corporation with potentially an unlimited budget, you risk to waste a ridiculous amount of money. We're talking about millions and millions and potentially years and years into something that nobody actually wants. And you could have just realized that in 2-3 months, right? Spending virtually nothing. And so insisting on this concept it is very helpful, and it does work. But changing mindset is, as in life, is not easy. Same is not easy for companies or corporations.
Do you find, having done this in the 2 companies obviously that we've spoken about today, but in your former companies as well, where do you tend to see the most kickback? Do you see it from maybe the management board, the developers, or the engineers themselves? Where do you generally find the people who are less interested or less inclined to accept this idea?
I think in my experiences was absolutely the management executives, right? Because I think there is a habit which I disagree with, but I guess it's very common to believe that you can be right just because you do know better, because you have more experience than others, because you have experience much more than others, and that gives you puts you in the position to make the right decision. And I feel it's very difficult for them to accept that. While I think that maybe embracing full lean startup, or embracing the concept of a radical MVP, right? So keeping it really to the minimum and so on, in a startup might still be difficult. But I guess agile is already much more known and used and common, and agile already has or Scrum has already which is I guess used by 90% of startups, already has the concept of iteration and adapting to situations that change, and you usually have, you know, a design team with UX people that are used to go to users and ask to the users what they think, what they feel, and so on and so forth. So the mindsets are different, and that makes it a little bit easier for startups to embrace lean startup than it is for executives in big corporations or enterprises.
Is there anything, I guess, other than what you're saying there, just try and explain lean in a different way, trying to get them to see the actual benefits of the quick feedback loop, so the MVP? Is there anything different that you would suggest if somebody from a larger corporate is watching this and saying, "Going, actually, I would want to try and implement that here"? Is there anything different you would suggest how they could approach their managers, other than those things we mentioned, to maybe push that process along a little bit further than maybe, you know, where we are right now?
Well, first of all, if they come from big corporation and enterprises, I would suggest them to hire Bain & Company, which I think my ex-managers would be very happy about. No, but jokes aside, I think that I honestly truly believe that it's just not going to work if the people that are in charge of a process do not want to, you know, consider or reflect upon or hear certain things, right? So, and that's based on my experience, right? And I guess it's maybe not the best answer, not the one you were hoping for, but I think, like, if you want to control the result of what you're gonna end up building, I think you just have no chances there, right? It's just not going to work. You're gonna end up doing like this ugly mix of pseudo lean startup, but at the end of the day, you do whatever you want and you fail. Well, then just don't even try implementing lean startup, right? Because this is just gonna actually add additional work on top of it. But I think do realize that big enterprises fail, right? Like there are like a gazillion of examples of out there. I don't know why, but the first example that comes to my mind is I think it was called the Fire phone or the Amazon phone anyway, right? So they spent like a gazillion of money in there, and it never went to market even. But we could find a ton of other examples of things that get released by massive corporation, and they just end up sitting on a shelf and nobody wants and nobody needs. And we see that constantly. We are actually surrounded by that. We see it even in the furnitures, in the things we have in our house. You can always see when something was designed on you know, on a screen, on a table, on a piece of paper, and never put in front of a users, because then you as a user, when you end up using that product, you see that it's flawed. You see that it just does not work as you wish, as you would expect. So just there is no point in resisting to this to this fact, and there is nothing to lose in implementing lean, in building MVPs. There's really nothing to lose. There is no reputation loss. There is no money waste. Nothing. You're just gonna learn something. So why not? I think we all should strive to constantly learn, and so enterprises should do that as well.
That's words from a true advocate right there. I think it's probably worth noting, and absolutely correct me if I'm not on the right path on this one, but reading through the book, and obviously I work in recruitment, right? So I don't have a product per se. I work with processes. And I think that's one thing that I've been trying to implement into my team is how can we take the learning, validated learning aspect of the lean startup and help implement it into recruitment that will better help ourselves, our teams, etc. And one thing is process management. So we've started to play around the idea now is, okay, we have an interview process to hire somebody into our company. This is the hypothesis. This is the validated learning we're trying to achieve. Let's go and do it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be just a physical product or piece of software. It could be a process. Is that right?
I think by definition, right? You need to have something that you can put in front of our users.
Mm-hmm.
So if we follow this definition, yeah, I would say a process can be as well, right? So you might want to, I don't know, try to formulate a question in multiple ways and see how it performs. I don't know if this makes sense, right? This is again your business, you know better, but so yeah, definitely. I think you can apply lean startup to basically anything you need to interact with the final users of your product. Going back to product market fit, you're not building anything for yourself, or maybe you are, but then I guess you're not building a business. So your users, the market, is the only one that can really judge, they can really validate, they can really prove or disprove any assumption. If you can interact with the market, then you can do an MVP there.
Perfect. Well, Lorenzo, look, before we run out of time, I appreciate you so much for jumping on, explaining kind of how you've dealt with it in the past two companies. Unfortunately, we didn't get onto the third, but obviously, if we have more time at a different time, then of course we can cover that as well. Because in that business, you had a slightly different role there as well, and it's always interesting to see the process. With your current company, obviously with Grazia and obviously the launch and things like that, if people wanted to try it out, if people want to sign up and use this kind of tasker platform, where can they find you, or where can they find the website?
Yeah, so they can find us on the App Store and on the Play Store, just searching for Grazia. The app is available for the time being in Berlin only, Berlin, Germany, and we are planning to extend to more cities as soon as possible. And they can also find us on our website, saygrazia.com, say as in the English say. And from there they can learn more about the app. We have some hopefully very tailored landing pages that explain what our product is.
Perfect. Like I said, thank you once again. I appreciate it. I'll put all that information on the videos as well. But yeah, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very, very much. It was my pleasure. Have a good one.